What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? In this video, I'm going to be going over how we can upload a CSV file to S3 using Node.js and how we'll process that same CSV file from our S3 bucket using AWS Lambda. So one thing I want to go over before we get started is the fact that I actually created this blog to write up everything that I'm going to talk about in this video. And you can also see there's another blog post that I created, but I'm going to start doing this to supplement what I talk about in the videos because I understand that people have different ways that they learn. Some people learn by watching videos, some people learn by reading and taking at their own pace. So I'm going to try my best to supplement each video with a blog post so that you can go in and find the code and you can find everything that you need, photos on how to do the same thing that I'm talking about in this video. So you can find it here at thinkmoretech.com, and I'll put a link in the description, but the thing that I'm going to use, or the post I'm going to use or reference, is this one: upload CSV to S3 using Node.js and creating a trigger with AWS Lambda. And if you go through it, you'll see everything that you need, and all the dependencies and code will be there, and pictures on what to click on and everything. So this will be in the description, and I'll try to do my best to create one for each video. And yeah, I just wanted to show you guys that before I get started. So yeah, the link will be in the description. Alright, so the first thing that we got to do is actually log into AWS, right? This is going to be the console that we're going to log into. So if you don't have an account, I would create one. All I got to do is press this create new AWS account. And I believe by default, AWS give you 12 months access to the free tier. So some of the services will be free. You have to look into what services, but the services that we're going to be using will be free under that free tier, which is AWS S3 and Lambda. So what I recommend doing is either creating accounts, or if you already have one, log in, and yeah, let's do that. And I'm gonna be right back once I log in. Alright, so once you log in, you should see something very similar to this, well, depending on if AWS does a big update by the time you watch this. But as of January 19, or actually today's the 18th, 2023, this is how it looks like. There are some of these like recent things that I've accessed, but if you don't see this, what you could do is, let me just like zoom in a little bit. Let me see, there it is. If you go to the search bar, right, and you go to S3, then this is what we're gonna need. This is where we're gonna get started. S3 is just gonna be, well, I'm gonna create a whole separate video on what it is, and hopefully by the time that's released, I'll have a link somewhere on the screen. But what S3 is gonna do is gonna allow us to store objects or data into a thing called a bucket, and from that bucket, what we're gonna do is retrieve that specific object and process it. In this case, or in this video, it's gonna be CSVs. I'm gonna upload a CSV file, put it into the bucket, retrieve it from the bucket, and process it. So that's what S3 does. It's very popular among the AWS services, and it's actually the oldest AWS service. I think it came out in March of 2006. So AWS had time to perfect it and make it what it is currently. We're going to use the standard bucket, which just means that it's going to be frequently used. It's going to be data that's frequently used, but there's different type of storage types for S3. And like I said, I'll make another video if that sounds confusing on S3. But we'll be using this to store our data, and this is also going to be what we retrieve the data as well. So click on it and we'll get started from there. Alright, so if you don't have any buckets, what you should see is this fancy looking page, a little introduction, and a nice orange button that says create a bucket. If you do have some buckets already, then you'll probably see some of your buckets exposed on somewhere on the screen. But since we don't have any buckets at this time, let's actually create it by pressing this create bucket button. Alright, so like I said, the bucket is going to be used to store our data, to store our information, and what we need to do is to find a bucket name first. And a bucket name is, like it says right here, a bucket name must be globally unique. So it's just going to be a way of identifying our buckets, a unique name globally, meaning that there can't be multiples of the same name. So George in Georgia can't have the same bucket name that I do once it's created. So we have to create a very unique bucket name. So hopefully it has the name that I have in my head, which is TWG CSV buckets, because we're going to be storing CSVs in this bucket, and this TWG is just short for Tech with Geo. So, right. And then you can choose the AWS region. I'm gonna keep it at US East because that's the region closest to me. So you just gotta figure out what region is near you and go with that. So, and then if you scroll down a bit, I'm gonna leave these defaults, and this is great by AWS, meaning that right here just saying it's gonna block all public access, meaning people from the outside doesn't have access to it. We just want people who's allowed to touch this. So it's just gonna stay internal. No external access will be available. I'm gonna keep versioning disabled, meaning that in AWS it does allow for versioning, so each file that you upload has a different version. As you upload the same file, you can have a different version of that specific file. So, like I said, all this will be talked about in the S3 video, but just to give you guys some knowledge, right? While I'm here, let me do that. And encryption, right? By default, S3 encrypts data as it comes in and while it's stored. So, this is just the encryption key that it's using. So, and then the only two things that we had to do was create the bucket name and select the AWS region, and then we can just go scroll down to the bottom and press create bucket. But these are some options that S3 has. If you want to make it public, all you have to do is uncheck this and some other stuff. So let's create the bucket. And boom, now we see it here, tech with geo or TWG dash CSV dash bucket. You can name it whatever you want, just make sure it's unique. And now we can get started. Now that the bucket is created, I want to create an API so that I can communicate with this bucket that I just created. So with that API, when someone uploads, in our case, we're going to use Postman to upload, but once somebody uses Postman to upload using our API, that CSV should go directly to this bucket. This is going to hold all our CSVs. That is why it's called TWG CSV bucket. So let's get started on that Node.js API. All right, so now it's time to start working on our Node.js server, which will be used to handle uploads, so that when the user uploads to our API or using our API, it will upload it to S3 directly. And yeah, to do that, you will need Node.js, and I'll leave a link in the description to the download page for that. Or if you have a Mac, you can use brew installed. Yeah, you'll need that for this piece. You'll need an editor, and in this case I am using VS Code, Visual Studio Code, my favorite, but you can use whatever editor that you want. In this case, I'm just going to be using VS Code. Now, we only need about 4 dependencies for this piece. We're going to need the AWS SDK, and we're going to need specifically the client-S3, right? And this will be used to communicate with S3, our bucket specifically, so that we have our storage option to store uploads to that bucket that we define. So we're going to need that to communicate with our buckets. The second one is going to be Express. Express is just a framework that goes hand in hand with Node.js. It's built on top of Node.js to help us manage our server and our routes. So it's just going to make our life easier when defining stuff for Node and creating our server. And then the last two is Motor and Motor S3. So we're going to use these dependencies to help us take in a file into our server and upload it to S3. So Motor S3 will use to communicate with S3, and then Motor will help us take in or create a middleware to take in files and use the storage option of Motor S3 to communicate to S3. So it should make that process seamless. It should make it easy, and that's why we're using it, to save us some time. So to begin that process of installing those dependencies, we're going to use the npm, right? We're going to use npm install, but before that, we actually had to make our ecosystem for that. So we're going to do npm init to create our package.json, which will allow us to begin that process of doing npm install and creating our node modules and all that good stuff. So let's run the command npm init. It'll give us a little prompt to start going over what we want to name our files and different information about our application that we're about to build. So I'm just going to leave it as the default package name of CSV upload API because it just took the name of the folder that this is in. So I'll leave it as that. The version is going to be 1.0. The description, no description. Entry point is going to be index.js. I'm going to create that. And then test command, there is no test currently, but if you want to create tests, they're good. Git repository. I don't have a Git repository right now, but I do intend on uploading it after, but right now I don't. Keywords, no keywords. The author, we can put TechWithGeo. The license, I'll leave it as that, and we are good to go. Now a package.json should appear right here. And what we'll do here in the scripts, we're actually going to create a script, and we're going to call it start. And what this is going to do is going to run our application for us. It's going to start our application. And the command that I wanted to run is node index.js. This is going to start our server once everything is ready. So as you can see, there's information regarding our application. It took the name, the version, there's no description, but you could go in and write one if you want. It defined that the main is going to be index.js, and we can have scripts that run specific commands based on the name that we give it. So if we do npm run test, it's going to run, this piece, right? But, there is no test, so it's going to say that error, there is no test specified. But for start, if I do npm run start, then it's going to run this command of node index.js, which, that's going to be used to start the application. So yeah, that's pretty much all we need for that end. And now we can do the npm install to get the dependencies that we'll need. So I'll do npm install, and the first one is going to be at AWS SDK / client-s3. Then there's going to be express, then there's going to be multer and multer s3 or -s3. And I already gave a little description on what each one of these are going to do for us, and as I start writing the code, then I'll give a little bit more. But npm install all of that, and once that is done, I'll be back. But we should expect the node modules to be here, and a package lock.json. Cool. So if it is installed properly, you should see something very similar to this. It's showing that the packages were installed, and like I said, you should see a node modules and a package lock.json. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a new file, and like I said, or as we specified, the index.js is going to be the entryway to our application. So we'll create that, and now we can start configuring the code we'll need to get this server running. So what we need to do is import what we just installed. So let's create some variables that's going to hold a reference to the dependency that we just installed. So the first one will be express, and that will require express. All right, makes a lot of sense. Then we'll create one called multer, and guess what? That will require multer. And then another one for multer s3. Right, that require multer s3. And then the last one is a little bit different. We're gonna require the S3 client from the AWS SDK, but we're gonna have to open up some curly braces and specifically extract the S3 client from it, and that's gonna be equal to require at AWS client -s3. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually create a variable or constant called app, and that's simply going to reference an instance of express. This is what we're going to use to create our route, and we're going to use to define what port this server will listen on. So we're going to need a reference to express, and we're going to store that in app. The next thing we're going to do is create a constant called port, and I'm going to make that equal to 3001. I usually like to extract the port into its own constant. So that's what I'm doing here, and I just made it 3001. So this can be any port that you have available, but I'm just going to make it 3001. Some people make it 8080, some people make it 8000. It's really dependent on you and whatever is available. And then I'm going to create another constant called S3, and this is going to be a new S3 client. So this is what we're going to use to have as our storage option so that we'll be able to communicate with S3. So on upload, we'll just store it using this S3 client. And the biggest one, which I'm just going to copy and paste, I'm sorry, just to save some time, yours and mine's, but we're going to have a constant called upload, right? So what motor allows, and if I hover over this, motor just returns an instance of several methods that we can use to generate middleware. So the specific middleware that we're going to use in our our request handler is a upload.single method, and as the name implies, it's just going to take in a single file. It's going to upload that to a storage option that we define. Now the storage option that we're defining is an instance of Motor S3, and what Motor S3 does is it allows us to communicate with S3. And how does it do that? Remember, we made a constant called S3, which is simply an S3 client. An S3 client allows us to communicate with S3 to a bucket, right? So what this Motor S3 is going to do is going to take in our instance of S3, our S3 client, and it's going to take the name of the bucket that we want to communicate with. And in this case is twg-csv-bucket, because that's the bucket that I created. But whatever bucket you created and whatever name that you use, you will put right here. And it's going to take that instance of S3, it's going to take the name of bucket, and now it knows what we want to communicate with in S3. And it's going to attempt to upload it to that bucket. Now we can also define other things like the metadata and the key. The metadata and key takes a callback function. And with this callback function, we can define the metadata and the key. The metadata is simply going to be metadata that S3 stores in regards to that file. So when we go to S3 and we open up that file, we should see the metadata that we define. So it's just information regarding that file. So in this case, the only metadata that I'm defining is the field name. You can put more stuff if you want, but I'm just keeping it simple and just putting the field name. And then the key is simply going to be the name that S3 is going to store your file as. So in my case, I'm just storing it as the date that this was uploaded, and I'm appending .csv at the end because I'm letting S3 know that this is going to be a CSV file. So as you can see, this just makes our life significantly easier. Motor compacts this into a middleware, and Motor S3 allows for that easy communication with S3 just by passing in some parameters. So that is why we're leveraging Motor and Motor S3 to do the communication between our server and S3. So let's actually start creating our route. We're not creating routes because we're just creating one route, and that route will be used to upload our CSV file to. And to do that, like I said, we're using a library called Express, which is built on top of Node.js, which allows us to create request handlers pretty easily. So we store that as app, and what we're going to do is we're going to do app dot, and it comes with so many different methods, but we want a specific HTTP method, which is post, so that can handle post methods based on the URL that the user uses or the endpoint that the user uses. We can specify that endpoint by doing by defining a string for the first parameter in this post method. And what I'm going to name this as is /API/upload-CSV. So when the user goes to localhost 3001, because remember above, I'm going to make this server listen on the port of 3001. So when the user goes to localhost 3001 /API/upload-CSV and they upload a file, we have to handle that, right? But this is the initial beginnings. So the next thing we're going to do is specify the middleware. Like I said, this Motor instance returns an instance of different middleware methods. So, and that's going to be stored in this upload variable. And the method that we're specifically going to use is upload. And to have access to those methods, you got to use a dot. And we can see that there's different type of methods. But in this case, I'm just going to use the single method, which will take in a single file, and we can define like what key we expect for that file, which in this case, I just expect the user to upload using a key of file. So once they upload using a key of file, it's going to take that file that's stored under this key, and it's going to attempt to store that file in the bucket that we defined using the client that we defined, right? And using that metadata from that file, which is in this case is going to be file.name or field name, and the key is just going to simply be the date that they attempted to upload that file. And then after that, this is all we need, by the way. You see how this is just quick and sweet? After that, we can return a response back to the user, letting them know that the file was uploaded properly, if it actually went through this middleware properly. And to do that, we'll just pass in another parameter, and this is just going to be a function, and the parameters are going to be the request itself, and I'm just going to store that as req, and we're going to have another parameter that's going to be what we're going to use to send the response back. So that's going to be res, short for response, or resp, just to make it simple. And it sounded like I was about to say resp ect, but no, I'm not. It's resp onse, short for response. But we're going to open that up and then return resp dot JSON, because we're going to return a response of a JSON type. And open that up, we're going to define a key of msg for message, and we're just going to, for the message, we're just going to let the user know that the file was successfully uploaded. And then for the second key, I'm going to make a key called file, and that's just going to return the file itself, like information regarding the file. And to do that, I'm just going to do take the request, right? And I'm going to return the dot file. That's simply the file that was uploaded, right? So request dot file. And that's really all we need for this route handler. We have this route handler that's going to be, if a user tried to upload using post to this endpoint of API/upload CSV, it's going to take that file. And if it has a key of file, then it's going to attempt to upload it to S3. And then once that's done, it's going to send a response back to the user saying that the file was successfully uploaded with information regarding the file. Cool. And then now we have to actually define, that what port this app or this server is going to listen on. And yeah, we can do that by doing app.listen. Like I said, Express is beautiful. It handles that for us. And we're going to define the port. So remember, I have a variable called port, which is just holding a value of 3001. So this is just simply saying, okay, listen on 3001. Or we could have just put 3001 here, but honestly, I like putting it in a variable, so port. And I'm going to put a comma and do a callback function that will console log that this server is running and it's listening on a certain port that we define, which the port that we define is 3001. So open up that, open up a little prompt, and I'm gonna say listening on port. And then I'm going to inject the variable port. And cool. We should be good to go at this point, right? We, created our dependencies, or we imported our dependencies, or we created instances of those dependencies. We're leveraging those dependencies such as Motor, and we're leveraging the Motor middleware to upload our file to S3. We're returning a response back to the user, and we're listening on the port that we specified. So like I said, like I created in the package.json, I created a script called start, so that when we want to start this application, all we got to do is npm run start. And now you can see that we're listening on 3001. So cool. Now let's actually go into Postman and test that all this hard work is working. All right, so now it's time to test the hard work, right? We just created this server. It's listening on 3001. If I go back, you can see that it's listening on 3001. And I am using the URL of localhost 3001 and the endpoint of API/upload-CSV, which we defined. And if you use a different endpoint, you can put that here as well. But this is just what I used. And I defined the HTTP method of post. And then actually, let me reverse a little bit. If you don't know what this is Postman. Postman is used to test out specific endpoints, APIs usually, and it allows you to specify HTTP methods and URLs for those, like what URLs you want to test those HTTP methods for. So in this case, you can do get, put, patch, anything, but in this case, I want to use post, and I'm defining the URL of our server or API. So that's what I have here, and that is what I'm going to use to upload a CSV to test our API. And to do that, all you got to do is go to body, right? And I already have a file attached. I'm using a test.csv. And to do that, all you have to do is click on this form-data radio button. And let me just do another example here. If I go right here and, actually before I do that, I got to like click this drop down right here. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little drop down here on the right of the key column. And if you drop down and press file, you'll see that you have an option to click on this and upload a specific file. So that's what I did. I clicked on it. I uploaded this .csv file, and the key is file because if I go back to the API, you'll see that for the middleware, I'm using upload.single, and I'm specifying the name of the key that I'm going to use to upload, and what it should look out for when it comes to uploads. I specify that the name should be file. So whenever I make a call to the API and it sees a key for the body of file, it's going to take that value here and it's going to attempt to upload that to S3. So make sure that this key matches what you put here for that single upload. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need. Just attach whatever CSV file that you want to upload here in the value section, and then make sure that this URL is fine. Make sure that it's using a post method because we define that the app should listen to a post, and then press send. Oh, let me scroll this, bring this up, and boom, as you see, it is uploaded successfully. The field name is file, and it gives information in regards to the file. Because remember, if I go back, I specified that I want the message to be file successfully uploaded, and the file is going to be or the file key is going to hold information regarding the file, which it did here. So yeah, and you can see the bucket, right? Information about where it's uploaded and all that good stuff. So now if I scroll a little bit to the left, you'll see I have my bucket here. And if I go inside of my bucket and I refresh, boom, now you see that it was actually uploaded. I am not lying. Let me see, this is 511. I go up, it is 512. So boom, this is the same file that I just uploaded, and the type is CSV. If we click on it, we can see information regarding that. But yeah, that is the CSV file that I just uploaded. You can see that the name is like a long date time is the current time, or well, at the time of upload is the time that was used. I believe this is I could be wrong, but epoch in milliseconds. But yeah, that is how we upload files to S3 using Node.js, and it worked first try, luckily. And now what we got to do is take this CSV file and process it using Lambda, which should be relatively quick. But this is cool. We're actually able to upload files to S3. All right, so we have a server that can upload to S3, and we can see that it works, but I am not satisfied. What we got to do next is, we're going to create a Lambda function. And when we create that Lambda function, right, we want to create a trigger. And with that trigger, I want to listen to uploads to this S3 bucket. And when a file gets uploaded to this S3 bucket, I want to get that specific file and I want to process it. So let's get started, right? Let's not make it a little bit confusing. Let's make it a little bit obvious. So let's go to the Lambda service in AWS. What we're going to do is go to the search bar and put Lambda and click Lambda. And what Lambda is, just to make it simple, is it allows us to create functions stored on AWS's end, and we can trigger those functions, or we can trigger that piece of code or that logic on triggers or whatever we need it, right? Or we can make calls for it to run. We don't have to create our own servers or our own infrastructure to have our code run, right? We can leverage AWS Lambda to run a piece of code that we define from within AWS Lambda. So that's what we want to do. We want to create a function within AWS Lambda, and we want it only to run when a file is uploaded into our S3 bucket. So let's create a function, and we're going to give it a name. And I want to give it a name of Python CSV Reader. And the reason why I'm doing Python CSV Reader is because the next piece I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this programming language to Python 3.9, because that's what we're going to write our function in. This is what you choose. You choose a name, and you choose the programming language that you want to write your function in, or you want to write your code in. And we're going to leave the architecture the same. We do got to change the permission though, because we have to make sure that Lambda has the ability to listen to events or to be able to read from S3 properly. Because remember what I said, S3 is pretty much blocked off. So we have to give it the proper permissions for it to even be able to retrieve or read from S3. So we're gonna create a new role from existing AWS policy templates. So let's click this last radio button, and I want to call this TWG dash CSV dash reader dash get access. It's a long role name, but it implies what I needed to imply. And then from here, we're going to search through this bottom bar. We're going to search for the policies that we want, and the specific policy that we want is Amazon S3 object read-only permissions, because we only care to read from it. We don't really care to write anything to it. We just want to be able to retrieve or read the file from S3, and then based on that file that we read, just process it. So and what I mean by process it, I'm simply just going to log information regarding that CSV file. But with the code, with the function that we're going to define, you can do anything from within there. So if you want to create a notification, you can do that. But just to make it simple, I'm just going to log the information, and we're going to see information regarding the CSV file. But so to create this function, this is all we need. We gave it a name. We gave it or we specified the language that we're going to use to write our code, and then we left the architecture the same, but we defined a role, or we attached a permission to this function to make sure that we're able to read from our S3 bucket without any hindrance. Because if we don't have this permission, then we won't be able to read any items or any data from our S3 bucket because of because it's not publicly accessible. So let's press create function, and we should be good to go. All right, cool. So when it's actually created, we should see a space like this. We have the Python CSV reader, which is the name that we defined, or whatever name that you chose. If you chose a different name, you can put that here. And then if we go at the bottom here in this code piece, you should see this is the code, or this is like the default code that comes with it. But this is what we'll start writing code for this Lambda function, so that whenever a trigger occurs, it'll run the code from within here. So if we did add a trigger and we just use the default code, what it would do is it would just return a status code of 200 and dump out a body of hello from Lambda. But we want to do something a little bit more than that, so we'll do that pretty soon. But Lambda makes it easy for us to do what we need, right? Which is add a trigger, because that's the next step, right? We want to listen to events that occurs in our S3 bucket, and specifically want to listen to uploads. So that's what we'll do. So let's press the add trigger button, and we got to specify the trigger source. So what we're going to do is we're going to specify the trigger source as S3, and click that, and we got to define the bucket. So in this case, I want to define the bucket that we just created, which is TWG-CSV-bucket, or whatever bucket that you want, or whatever you created. And I'm not trying to listen to all object create events. I want to listen to a specific HTTP method, which is put. And in the back of your mind, you're probably thinking, what? Puts? I thought since we're uploading, it'll be posts. But no, because we're using the AWS SDK, the event that is used for the SDK, for some reason, is put. So if you're using the SDK, you have to use put. So yeah. And then we could define, prefixes, or we could define suffixes, but I'll leave this as defaults, or I'll put a suffix of .csv because we only want .csv files. So, but I'll leave the prefix optional. But both of these are optional, but I want to make sure that the ending piece of our file ends with .csv, because I don't care about .txts, I don't care about any of those, I just care about .csvs. And then I acknowledge that, that if we try to use the same bucket for input and output, then there may be a recursive issue. So you got to make sure that you acknowledge this. And then we'll press add, and we should be good to go. Boom. So that was quick. We added a trigger, and now the main piece is the code, because what this trigger does is essentially when we upload to S3, and we're listening to that bucket, right? We define the bucket. And now whenever we upload, it's going to run this code, but we don't really care what this code is doing. We want it to do what we want it to do, right? So now it's time to actually start, writing some code specifically for what we want. So let's get started with that. So I'm going to leave the JSON piece, but I'm going to do some other imports. I'm going to import the OS. I'm going to import Boto 3. Boto 3 is simply the AWS SDK for Python. I'm going to import CSV because we're going to be handling CSV, so I'm going to need that to read through it. I'm going to import IO so that we make sure that we're reading the data properly from the CSV. And yeah, that's pretty much all the main imports that we're going to need. But now we're just going to need an instance of Boto 3 so that we can use the S3 client to communicate with the bucket. So I'm going to do S3 client, or make a variable called S3 client, and I'm going to make that equal to Boto 3 dot client, and we're going to specify the client as S3. So cool. Now we have a variable that references an S3 client, so now we can use that to communicate with S3, and we can specify the bucket and the name in the near future, which we're about to do soon. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to events. Like, remember what I said, that this is going to listen for any triggers within the S3 buckets, and when it does occur that someone uploads a file to the S3 buckets, information regarding that event will be stored in this event variable, and within that I can get the name of the bucket, the name of the bucket that the event occurred on, and I can get the key. The key is simply going to be the name of the file. With that information, I can use the Boto 3 S3 client to call or to get that specific object in our bucket. And then what I'm going to do is once I make that GET request to the bucket to get information regarding that file that caused this trigger to occur, then I can process that individual file from the bucket. And in this case, like I said, I'm just going to log the information, and I'm going to show you guys how you can see the logs for this pretty soon. But that's the mindset that I have for this function. Now, to get the bucket name of this event, right? And I'll leave a link in the description to how the event looks like. Or if I go to test here, I should be able to. Actually, no, I believe there's a specific file. Let me get the link to that, and I'll be right back. So this is how a Lambda event looks like. It's simply a record, right, that holds a object within an array, and it holds information such as the event version, the event time. If I scroll a little bit down, you'll see that if I go in a little bit deeper, you'll see that within S3, because this is an S3 event, by the way, every event, there's different, like we saw when we were setting up the trigger, there's different services that you can set up a trigger for. So this is for S3 specifically. So if I go to the S3 key, we can see information regarding that event for that specific instance. So we can get the bucket name, and we can get the object key, right? So object key is just the file or whatever is being uploaded to S3 or whatever occurred within that bucket. That would be that would be the key. So we're going to use this information, such as the bucket name and the object key, to retrieve the object from S3 and then process that object. So let's do that. But this is how it looks like. I'm gonna leave a link in the description to this, just in case you guys want to go in and get your hands dirty and want to play around with this object. All right, so cool. Back to the Lambda function. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get the bucket name. So to get the bucket name, I'll just use some camel case of bucket name and then make that equal to the event. And remember, it is an object of records. So we're going to open that up and use the value of records, and then I'm going to open that up. Remember, records is an array, so I want the first instance in that array, so I'm going to use 0. And then to get the bucket name, I have to go, let's go back so we can see. So this is an array, so I want to get the first object in this array, and then within that, this is an object, so within this object I want to get the key of S3, and then nested in S3 is the bucket, and then nested within bucket is the name of the bucket. So that's what I'm doing here. And then so it's going to be 0, and then go in deeper and do S3, and then I'm going to get the bucket key, and then within the buckets I want to get the name. Cool. Now to get the actual S3 file name, I'm gonna do something very similar. So let's do event. We're going into the records, get the first instance in the record, then we're going to do S3, but now I'm not gonna do bucket. I want to get the object information, so I'm going to go into object, and then I'm going to get the name of the object, which is the key. So now we have the bucket name and the file name that we inserted into the bucket, and I am going to log that just for reference. So I'm going to do print bucket name, and I am going to print the S3 file name. Cool. And then I want to make a call to our S3 bucket using the S3 client instance that we have, which is just a Boto3 client that will allow us to communicate with S3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called RESP, not ECT, but this is short for response. And this is going to hold the response back from S3 because we're about to use the S3 client to communicate with our bucket. So we're going to do S3 client dot get underscore object, because that's what we're about to do. We're about to get the object, and to get that object we got to specify 2 parameters. The first one is going to be the bucket, and that's going to be equal to the bucket name, and the second parameter is going to be the key, which is going to be equal to the S3 file name. So now it's going to make a call using Boto3 to get that object based on the bucket name and the file name, which is the key. And then with that response, what we can do is we can try to read the CSV file, because this is going to be a response, but now we got to make sure that data is in the proper format to to extract the data from it. So with that, I'm going to create another variable called data, and I'm going to make that call response, and I want to get the body from the response. Remember, this is a call, right? A HTTP call using Boto3. So I want to get the body from the response that I just got, and then I want to read that body, but then I want to make sure it's decoded to UTF-8. Make sure that it's in the proper format so that I can read it. And to read it, remember I imported the CSV library. So the next line, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a reader instance or reader variable, and that's going to be csv.reader. Reader. And then I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to do IO, which I imported IO.string IO, and I'm going to pass in the variable of data, which is holding the decoded value of our CSV file. And then boom. Now the last thing we're going to do is, now we're going to iterate through the reader row by row and print out each individual row. So for row in reader, which simply is going to be for each row in the CSV, print out the row. Like I said, there's so many, and let me just erase this stuff. Like there's so many cases or use cases that you can use here. Like say for instance you were expecting a CSV with email and a password, or not email or password, it's bad to send password like this, but the email and the username, first name and last name, right? And you want to send a notification, you can do that here, right? You can read through it, make sure that each row has whatever you're expecting, the key that you're expecting, and then try to get the value. And if the value is there, you can send out a notification to the user based on if the email is there, right? So there's so many use cases that you can use here. I just want to make it simple so that you guys can use your creativity from here. Remember, this will run any code that you want from here, right? And we created the trigger. Once the trigger is triggered, right, then it'll run this Lambda function. So I just wanted to expose you guys to that, and you guys can use your creativity here. I just wanted to log the information, and you guys will go from there. But this is really all we need. We got the bucket name, we got the file name. We're going to retrieve that information from the S3 bucket based on what we was able to retrieve from the event. We're going to get that data from the response of that S3 client request of getting that object. We're going to read or we're going to make sure that the CSV file is decoded to the proper format, and we're going to read through the CSV row by row. And then now we're going to actually make sure that it's actually logging the proper data. But before we can do that, we got to make sure we deploy the changes, because if we don't, then it's going to be using the previous code, which you don't really care about, right? So press deploy, and now when we trigger, or when we upload to S3, it's going to trigger this code, not the previous one. So now let's go back to S3. And let me go back to the bucket, and let me delete this, right? I want to delete this. I want to, and I always usually just copy this and paste that in, but and make sure there's no space right here. Delete all the objects. I want to make sure that this is a clean slate. Then I want to go back to Postman. I want to send it again, right? Then I want to make sure that it's here. So let me go back to the bucket. All right, so it's here, right? This is a fresh bucket. And then now, this is a fresh bucket. And now let me go back to Lambda. And I want to make sure that I read it properly. So if I go back to this Python CSV reader, and I go to monitor, which by default, which is amazing, this Lambda function comes attached with CloudWatch, so it will watch for all requests that this function handles, right, and automatically stores the logs generated through the code through CloudWatch. So like I said, I printed out logs within the code, so that means automatically CloudWatch will go in and take that information and monitor all those requests through here. So we should be able to see it here, or we should be, but I don't see anything. So we'll see what happens. Let me see. So we'll check for the latest hour. We can actually even go to a separate portal. So let me see, because sometimes that takes longer to refresh. So sometimes we might have to go here exactly and see. We'll see way more stuff. So the last events should be this one. So let's click on that, and boom, we see. And let me go back to the S3 to make sure that it's actually matching the bucket that I'm expecting, or not the bucket, but the file name that I'm expecting. So if I go to the bucket and I see that this ends at 5175, so boom, all I put in that CSV was my first name, my channel name, and the description, just a software engineering channel. But as you can see, it's cool, right? CloudWatch handles all the logs for our reader, our Lambda function, and I'm able to even see previous logs for other things. As you can see, I did some testing back in on January 15th, but the most recent event was January 18th, which is today, and that is because it triggered based on the upload that I just did. So we can see that we're able to upload a file to S3 using Node, using a API that we created, and with that upload, we're able to trigger a Lambda function, which all it does is it prints out each individual row in the CSV file and it logs it. And we're able to see those log streams within CloudWatch, because by default these Lambda functions come with CloudWatch, so it processes all the requests that comes in and all the logs that appear from within that code or within that function in itself. So that handles a lot for us, and we even were able to attach a role to our Lambda function to be able to communicate with S3, because remember S3 is blocked from the public by default. So we did a lot in this tutorial. Hope you guys enjoy. If you have any questions, just let me know. And I plan on doing more of these AWS videos, because I realize a lot of people want to get into the field through cloud, like cloud roles. So I feel like these will be helpful, and this was a very good beginner project, I believe, and more is coming. So if you have any questions, and if you have any recommendations, if you have anything that you want to see, you can put in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and yeah, hope you enjoy.